Welcome to the Cabin Culture Podcast, where we spend a little more time diving deeper into all the fun parts of cabin culture. We like to think of this as both the material and imagined expressions of how cabin lovers, dwellers, builders, and designers wish to live a more simple and authentic life. Today we're welcoming Mitch, a commercial airline pilot who turned 80 acres of Maine forest into something truly unique in the short-term rental world. A fly-in cabin experience complete with its own FAA-registered runway. What started as a practical solution for getting his family from Pennsylvania to their beloved Maine quickly evolved into a destination that's capturing the imagination of pilots and non-pilots alike. From the initial market research and pilot Facebook groups to the silverware stage of outfitting a remote A-frame cabin, Mitch shares the realities of building a business around your passion while maintaining a demanding full-time career. We'll explore how his extensive travel experience staying in hotels worldwide informed his approach to hospitality, the unexpected joy he's found in guest feedback about children experiencing their first moose sighting, and why he believes investing in beauty and thoughtful details pays dividends in bookings. Whether you're dreaming of creating your own unique cabin experience or simply curious about what happens when aviation meets hospitality, this conversation offers insight into turning a personal passion project into a thriving business that's bringing families closer to nature, one landing at a time. Let's do it. Mitch, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on.
I feel like before you introduce yourself, this is, I think, only the second time we've had someone on the podcast that I've met before via a cabin consultation, but we did it Mitch, was it like 2 years ago?
Yeah, it was June of 23.
Yeah. So it's so fun to be connecting with you now. 2 years later, the cabin is built. I've read about you all over the place. I feel like you all have gotten great coverage for what you're doing. And now we get to kind of check in and see what you're up to. So why don't you start by introducing yourself and your cabin to folks who haven't seen it yet?
My name is Mitch, and my wife and I, we built a cabin in central Maine. We bought 80 acres of land that was just forest, and we built an airplane runway on it. And then as soon as we started building this runway, I always wanted to have a cabin. And once we built this runway, I realized, how can we share this place with others? Because it's like when you're there, it's like the magical Maine woods. You're out in nature,
Yeah.
and so we built this A-frame, and the hosting experience has been so much more fun than we expected, and it's a
Mhm.
lot of work, as everyone talks
Yeah.
about on this podcast. But yeah. So my wife and I grew up in that area of Maine, and so
Did you
we
meet there as kids?
we went to high school together. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. That was going to be my first question is what was your connection to Maine? Because where you're located is not like a touristy section of Maine necessarily.
Right.
And so I wondered what was your connection to it?
We have family on the lake just down the just 2 miles down the road, and so the lakes in this area are just so clean and incredible. And
Yes.
I've traveled to a lot of different places, and I realized coming back to Maine, the lakes and the water quality are just the best. And
Yeah.
so we're definitely spoiled in that regard.
And I think a lot of people in Maine don't realize it. I moved to North Carolina and lived on a lake my first year of teaching, and it's like a swamp. And
Hmm.
people there loved it, right? It was still a treat, but I'm
Yeah.
like, guys, I don't think you're aware what exists if you go north to Maine.
Hmm.
And maybe it's better that you don't realize it because it's truly different.
Yeah. So with our cabin, the big thing is we have kayaks that we let guests take to the lake. So because that really completes the stay to be able to be on the water. Because otherwise,
Yeah.
our cabin's it's not on the water; it's in the middle of the woods. So
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, but I have another follow-up question now that I know why Maine. Why a runway? I mean, I know this and anyone who follows you knows this, but for folks that don't, why was that the first thing that you built? And most of us wouldn't even think about that as an amenity.
so we live in Pennsylvania because of my full time job, but our heart is always in Maine. And so honestly, with our two daughters, we had done all these road trips from Pennsylvania to Maine, and with let's just say some of the road trips were long. And
Yeah.
so we also have a Cessna, a small plane, and so we're able to take off from Pennsylvania and fly straight into this strip and then be on the lake 5 minutes later. And originally, I just like built this for us, but very quickly I was like, oh my gosh, we need to share this with others because
Yeah.
so then I started going on different Facebook groups for pilots and talked about,
Ah,
hey, we're thinking about building a cabin in the Maine woods. And it just the number of people that said we're so interested, like I'll be your first one to book. That a light bulb went off when I realized we could do a fly-in Airbnb, but also make it's open to everyone, right? Like only
right.
30% of our guests are pilots. The rest, everyone else just drives in. So it works for everyone, but
Right.
that's why there's the runway.
Okay. This is interesting because it feels like, was that intentionally market research? Because I don't think a lot of people do market research. And I actually think that's a really important piece of the dreaming phase is figuring out like what I'm dreaming, is it viable? And in some cases, we see a proof of concept nearby or whatever, and we can look at their numbers. But this was a very unique concept. So was that intentional that you're like, well, let me even see if this is an amenity that would be worth the investment?
It just it checked like so many boxes for us, and that like for me it includes flying, which I'm passionate about. I've been flying for 20 years. It included a place to be able to get our kids out into nature. It's near
Yeah.
family. It supports or boosts the local economy, and that it's in a small little town, so I love just kind of bringing guests in a
Yeah.
light footprint. And yeah, just getting my family out in nature is so important to me, but then realizing that other families could be doing the same thing with their kids when because we're only there 3 or 4 weeks a year.
Right.
So to let other families do that has been incredible. And we what they write in the guest book about their children's experiences at this cabin is just like heartwarming. Like
Yeah.
that's something we totally didn't even expect. Um, but the other thing that we did, and this you played a big part in this actually, is that the runway was one part of like the marketing idea. But the other part is that we tried to just make the cabin really beautiful inside and out, like your
Yeah.
place, because the town that it's in is not necessarily like people find our cabin because they're looking for a beautiful place to go. They don't find it because they type in Chesterville, Maine, we need to go there.
Right.
So
Right.
people drive from Boston or New York, or like we've had people from Germany or like wherever they're coming from that have never even heard of Chesterville, Maine, but they're
Right.
going there because it's a beautiful cabin in the woods. And if I didn't start following you and look at how beautiful your place was, I might have like cut my own budget and I would have done like a cheaper cabin,
Yeah.
but then we wouldn't have the photos like to attract the guests. So
It's a tricky balance, right? Because I hear you, and that was definitely part of our strategy too. And it's a tricky balance of figuring out how much to invest. Like I struggle with this. We were at the cabin last week and I wanted to rearrange the loft. And I was like, this is more functional for me, but it doesn't photograph as well. And that tension, I hate feeling it of like, I want the experience to be good, but but it's the reality of like, if you're going to market in a small town and create a destination, you have to be able to like, capture the magic that it feels like to be there, and the only way you can do it is visually. And you've done a hell of a job. I mean, it's beautiful. It's obviously working. You've created like a really stunning space with this very unique amenity.
yeah, and I've always loved photography as well. Like I'm not an incredible photographer myself, but I love good photography, which is that's what Instagram is, right? So like I
Right?
love incorporating that, and that turns out that ends up being the marketing. But
Yeah.
you know, the photography, that's what makes someone click on your Airbnb link
Right.
or your and yeah, so that part's been fun too, just to like kind of support or like work with the photographers that have come to stay at the cabin.
Yeah. Yeah, because and I also think it's fun for them. I was just watching the video with Mike Will Travel. He did the YouTube video there. And it does feel like these photographers go to so many beautiful cabins. And I mean, it's their job, so I'm sure they love it all, but to go to some place that is a truly different experience, I can imagine you can just kind of see the giddiness as he was talking about, "Oh, and by the way, someone's gonna
Yeah.
come pick me up in a plane," right? Like,
Oh,
you don't get that at most cabins.
yeah, that was awesome. And that came together like at the last minute. And that's where I love just the community of networking of like cabin and pilots and all that.
Right.
So there was this other pilot from like the Bangor area, and I told him, I said, "Hey, this like big YouTube, you know, cabin guy's coming." And he was like, "Oh, I'm in." He's like, "I'll fly over and meet him and take him for a ride." And I was
Wow.
like, I connected the two. They'd never met. I'd never met either of them in person. And then all of a sudden he's taking him for a plane ride. And yeah, Mike was like so pumped. Like he was, yeah, you could see
Yep.
that smile. So
Understandably. But Mitch, I think this is such a good takeaway for folks listening because what you've done, and this is what I always say, like if you want a successful Airbnb, create what you want to exist in the world and take your passion and love and then share it with other people rather than saying what is working, let me copy that, right? You can take I think your point is good though. You can take lessons from other people of like what do they do that make it successful, but you leaned into this is what I love for my family and as a pilot, these are the things I want. And then sure enough, your community starts putting those things together and it the way that you market is different than some people. The way that you're hosting guests is different than other people because you're doing it in the way that is most true to you.
yeah. And I think it just is a coincidence, I guess, but that other families or just anyone that comes to our cabin, they do like, I mean, the idea of getting your kids away from screens and iPads and getting them, trying to catch frogs in the woods and just
Yeah.
that old fashioned childhood. That's what these cabins are for, is
Yeah.
to escape, right? And so almost everyone in our guest book, they use the word escape.
Yeah.
And I met with one guest once where I think they were from like Long Island, New York, and they said we're in an apartment with a highway and constant noise. And they said being here has been, we've just been standing on the deck, just staring at the trees
Yeah.
and the silence or just the sounds of nature that are like, this is exactly what we needed. And
Yeah.
when guests give me that feedback, like it's really fulfilling because you're like, sure, they could have gone to another cabin, but like I created a spot where people can go and like find that like serenity in nature. And I'm kind of going on and on. And so you can probably tell this is my passion, right? It's just like
Yeah.
being in the woods. So
Yeah. Okay, so I'm kind of curious. We talked about this a little bit right before we started, but you like mentioned to this I think highlights this weird discrepancy between real life and cabin life. You mentioned to this pilot friend like, "Oh, hey, there's like this big cabin YouTuber who wants to come stay at the cabin." It, and I struggle with this. Like, what is it like explaining to other pilots in your full-time life or other colleagues in your full-time life about this like cabin life that you lead? Because it does feel like almost a separate part of who you are. I mean, you've mixed them because you can fly into the cabin, but it is this whole other world that you've kind of thrown yourself into in the past couple of years. And I personally struggle with that. I'm guessing struggle or just like think about it a lot. I'm guessing other people listening have that too. What has that been like for you?
yeah, so like as a commercial pilot, I'm always in like the busiest, loudest, most stressful places, airport terminals and delays and just all these things going on. And somehow it always comes up with a co-pilot that I'm flying with. It's like, oh man, like I've got this cabin in the Maine woods, and like that's my happy place, and I'm ready to just retire and go into the woods,
Yeah.
not come out. And
Yeah.
and then we just start talking about it. But if I just show them one picture of it, everyone's just like, oh yeah, like that's where when you're like having a busy, stressful work day. I will literally like look at a picture of the cabin and then like mentally be there. And yeah, that's a highlight for me. I
Well, and I
mean,
think that goes back to what you were saying about like the Instagram thing is like, yes, it's about marketing your cabin, but also there might be people following you on Instagram who never stay at your cabin and still appreciate seeing it pop up every day because it has that same impact on their nervous system just in the midst of a busy scroll. Do you know what I mean? I sometimes wonder about that.
yeah, like we've had tons of people. So I started the Instagram at the beginning of the build, and then it was just all the raw photos of the build. And
Right.
tons of people have reached out to me and were saying, we loved following your build. It's incredible. And they're also, I guess they're kind of living vicariously through it, but then they're also thinking about doing it for themselves. But
Yeah.
yeah, there's definitely some people you can tell they'll probably never come, but they're like mentally, we visited your cabin
Yep.
through Instagram and we loved it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's still part of the sales funnel because if they're following you and then they could refer you to someone else. If a friend says, like, oh, hey, we're thinking about going to Maine, well, there's going to be one place that they immediately think of because you pop up on their feed every day. Right. And
Yep.
you've provided that for them. So I think there's value there. Why did you start documenting? I just feel like this is a piece that a lot of people miss is the whole value of documenting a build. Can you share a little bit about that? Like why you decided to start from the very beginning and what was that process like documenting a build, which can sometimes be a vulnerable experience. I think that's why people tend to avoid it of like, oh, well, it's not done yet. And I'm a lot of uncertainties. Like, should I put that all out there in the world for other people to see?
Probably my biggest reason is I love before and after photos. Like I love looking. I'm a do-it-yourself or builder type, so I love to watch something build or grow the
Yes.
before and the after. And I think a lot of other people liked watching that too during the
Yeah.
build. And I think a lot of pilots were like, just have the basic question like, how do you build a runway?
Yeah.
And I didn't know how to build one either. Like we just like figured it out, and I hired this amazing excavator guy, and he had never built a runway either, but we just like figured it out. And I wanted to kind of answer that question for other pilots, like this is how you build a little airport. And there's actually this thing in our country, the number of airports in our country is actually shrinking. Like small airports
Huh.
disappear and turn into like housing developments. So it was kind of neat to
Huh.
give back to the aviation community and adding a new airport.
Yeah. Okay.
And
So you're officially an airport.
yeah, I mean, we try not to make it so it's an airport that's creating a lot of noise in this small town. But yeah, we
Yeah.
are on the FAA map. We're in the FAA registry, so that we did that for a couple of different reasons. But if someone's, we've had pilots that have come from Virginia or Michigan, and so they can navigate to the strip because it's in the GPS database. But um, it's not a runway in the sense that it's not paved, right? It's
Right. Which is
it's
common, I feel like, in Maine. In the rural parts of Maine, I've seen multiple that are not paved, that are just
yeah.
grass.
And if we did pave it, for one, that would cost an arm and a leg, so it's just not happening. But it
Right.
would change the whole vibe of the place, right? Like it's almost like people are going to a cabin in the woods to get away from pavement,
Well, there's
right?
this thing, we've talked about this on the podcast. Have you heard of grounding? It's like
No,
scientifically researched that when your bare feet touch the ground, it does something to like, I don't know if it's your nervous system or your energy system. And that it's recommended. I think the number is like 45 minutes a day that you should be grounded. But I think like what you're saying, that's a whole nother conversation. But what you're saying is totally right. That just the presence of pavement separates us from the earth and does something energetically.
so I like as we're building this or just even considering doing it, I just kept thinking about the build and the money and it's going to be rented, and I didn't even think about what the guest feedback would be like. And
Yeah.
so that is the thing that's been the most unexpected and the coolest part of this is when people write in the guest book, like they just write about the sound of the birds, the trees, the greenery,
Yeah.
the sitting in the hot tub looking at the stars. Like
Yeah.
we hadn't seen that many stars before. Here, I'll just read one quick guest book
Yeah.
entry because I love this one. These were some children that wrote this. They said, "We love the A-frame cabin and we were astonished by the hot tub. And we also loved making fires. We loved the hike around the property and we saw a moose just
What?
before, yeah, just before the
So
pond
jealous.
and a snake and a porcupine. And we saw the moose again on the runway. Thanks for the stay." And so I've seen moose tracks everywhere, but I haven't even seen the moose yet on the property. But when I heard this from this family, I was just like, yes, like those kids saw their first moose. And
That is a big deal. I don't know if other people outside of Maine, I feel like that is my family has been going to Maine for our whole life. And like I only have 3 moose sightings, I think. My mom spent her entire life there and never had a single moose sighting. Like,
the majestic moose, yeah.
yeah. It feels like a very yeah. So for that to happen at your place, I'm very jealous and also very excited for that kid.
And I just live vicariously through their feedback because like there was another family that just wrote. It was a family from Florida that came last year, and they said, all the same stuff. We had an incredible time doing this and that. And they said, this is where we taught our son to make his first campfire.
Mm,
And that brought me back to my childhood, which I loved having campfires as much as possible with my,
right.
grandparents. So like, um, to think that we were the place that helped that family have that experience was extremely fulfilling. And that totally makes it worth it. Like all the blood, sweat, and
Right.
tears that hosts put into it. So
Right. Right. I never thought we'd be family friendly because it was just designed for couples. That was like my target market. But now we're getting requests from couples who came when they were dating, got engaged, got married, and now have their first kid. And it's
oh
like,
yeah.
how can I say no to having a baby when it's like a baby that the relationship started there,
Yeah.
right? But those milestones happening at your place, there's magic in that I don't think a lot of people think about until
Yeah.
they start hosting. And in fact, I think that's an interesting question that I'd love to hear from you because I did talk to you very early on. And most people who book cabin consultations, it's because there's a lot of fears or a lot of concerns or just a lot of unknowns. And so I think it could be really interesting to hear from you. What were some, because now you're on the other side and you're sharing these guest book entries and you're like, oh my God, it's even better than I imagined.
Yeah.
But that doesn't take away from the reality that it is very scary at the beginning. So take us back to like when you had the idea, you were just floating it. What were some of the like big scary things that intimidated you?
Yeah. I was a nervous Nelly. Like, I mean, the biggest thing is like you're spending all this money. We did like a construction loan, and then you, we didn't right before you go live on Airbnb, you're like, is anyone even going to want to come here? And that's when I did my consultation with you. And I was
Yeah.
just a nervous Nelly. I'm like, is
Yeah.
this gonna, and then you gave some great tips, and like we worked on our guest book and all these different things. And then we turned it on and we started getting the bookings right away. And it was just like, it was like, all right, this huge gamble
Right.
was worth it.
Right.
But yeah, it was, I mean, yeah, I'll be honest, like I think for most people considering this or that have built a cabin, like the financial stress building a place is expensive. It-
Yeah.
And then you build it, and then I call this like the silverware stage where, and because I have a buddy who's just finishing a cabin in Puget Sound out in Washington right now, and he's in the
Yeah.
silverware stage where they have this beautiful new cabin, and he's now figuring out that you have to buy silverware and dishes and towels, and you basically are making a house, a couch, and like all,
Right.
all these things.
Right.
A- and he's like, oh my, like this is way more stuff than I thought. And
Right.
but you want to have all the spatulas and the all that stuff. And
And you don't wanna cheap out on the knives because that'll come back literally and, like, bite you potentially, but, like, you
yeah,
have to spend there.
yeah. And so that's a hard stage because you're just like you're trying to get it over the finish line. You're buying blankets and
Yeah.
mattresses and your furniture, and yeah, but
That's
he's
that's where it's helpful for a build. A build wasn't my first one, and so as soon as we started and it was kind of handed off to the builder aside from, like, big decisions, I started creating spreadsheets with, like, literally, like, bottle opener, like every small like toilet plunger. How many
yeah,
of those do we need? Okay, well, in that cabin, we only need one. But now I have this list. When we did the next one, you can just go to that list and be like, okay, well, actually, for this one, I need four toilet plungers. And you can do all the math to like figure that out
yeah,
so it doesn't hit you at the end of the build when you've spent all this money and gone over and you're like, oh my God, now I need to buy trash cans for every room. The very unsexy, unfun things that add up and end up costing a lot of money.
yeah, yeah. Like we've stayed in a lot of rental houses, in like Outer Banks or whatever. And I was thinking about, okay, what are the things that we were in that kitchen and we couldn't find? Like
Right.
we were at one house with no spatulas, or we were at,
Right.
oh, there's no toaster. And you could tell in some of these rental houses is that you could tell the owner was very detached and didn't quite care. And so
Yeah.
I've just tried to take this like opposite approach of like, let's make sure we have everything. Like I want it to be a
Yeah.
great stay. People are spending their hard-earned money,
Yep.
on a vacation, on a getaway, and so they deserve to have a great stay. So I've become a little bit obsessive with just always trying to make the place better.
Yeah.
And the
It is interesting once you turn that lens on or, like, turn that switch on, it is almost annoying because then it's never gonna be perfect, so you're always gonna be working.
or
Sometimes
it's
I
annoying for our
envy. I mean,
spouses. Yeah.
Yes.
because
Yeah.
I mean, my wife is super supportive, but she's like, okay, you've been thinking about the cabin a lot, how about a break? And I'm like, you're right, you're right.
Yeah. That's like the number one thing we fight about at the cabin though is like Sean's very practical. And so he's like, okay, we need one of those things to hold the hot tub lid cover so that it doesn't sit on the ground when they take it off. And I'm like, I hear you. We do need that. And also, we're facing the rock. So it cannot lift the hot tub cover up so that it blocks the rock because
Yeah,
it's
good point.
crucial that they have a good experience. And he's like, this is ridiculous, Janice. Like, just put the hot tub assist on. And I'm like, "No." And that's the, like, small attention to detail where I'm like, "That would bug it would bug me as the owner. Of course it's gonna bug someone, you know?" And so you sometimes you're like, "I wish I could just turn that off," and it could just be, like, good enough.
And a lot of people write in our guest book like this. We can tell this place was very well thought out and deliberate, and that it's nice to hear that because like that's what we do as hosts, right? And they can
Right.
tell that it wasn't just like thrown together. And so like because guests notice that they
Yes.
notice like, all right, oh, there was a place to put the luggage, and yeah, there was
Right.
soap, like
Right.
these things that matter. And they can tell that myself along with other hosts like us, like they can tell that we're invested and we're checking on them and we're available to answer their questions, which is the opposite of staying in a hotel, right? It's
Right.
just the opposite. The person at the front desk is not like, oh, I hope that they're comfortable up there. They're just like, all right, you check in, you're done.
Yeah. Yeah, that was gonna be my question because you travel so much for your job. You've stayed at tons of hotels. You've also stayed at Airbnbs with your family on vacation. What have you collected? I'm curious specifically about the hotel side though, because I think about this all the time when I'm at hotels of what can I take from this because hotels are what people are traditionally used to traveling in. So there are elements of it that we want to get rid of, but there are elements that people don't want to get rid of and they kind of expect because that's what they've seen in the past. So what have you taken from all your travels that you implemented? Either things from hotels that you intentionally kept or things that you intentionally changed?
So the biggest thing I've taken, or what I really like to incorporate, is I think about how is that hotel treating their employees to make their employees like
Mm,
invested in the guest experience, right? And
yeah,
honestly, with most big hotel chains out there, there's almost none of that, right? The person working there is just kind of doing their job, and they're not incentivized to do an incredible job.
yeah,
And so I'm like, we can do that better. And so, like Lauren, our property manager, is amazing, and she's been one of our friends for a long, long time, and so we try to just like take really good care of her and work with her, and she treats the cabin like it's hers, which is
yeah,
awesome. That's exactly what we like
yep,
want, because she
yeah,
is so invested. She cares about if the guest has a good time. And so because of that, we like, do bonuses and all these different things. And so that's fun to have that within our control to try to treat, you know, we have a couple other property managers that help with like, firewood kind of stuff, but to treat all of them like I would want to be treated as an employee
yeah.
is that's been fun to do, because that's not common at every job in America.
No. Do you have any tips on that? Because I do feel like a lot of hosts and owners can be really good intentioned in their end desire to create the perfect stay for their guests. But I have heard in conversation, I have heard sometimes hosts where like they want everything to be perfect. So they micromanage in a way that if I were the cleaner, I might feel the opposite of empowered, right? Like almost like I'm walking on eggshells or like everything needs to be just right or I'm going to get right. And I think that's one way to do it. And I totally understand where that comes from, but the way you're talking about it has such a different feel to it, and I'm wondering where that came from. Is it because you were friends with Lauren to begin with?
Uh,
Like, how do you do it? What are some
I'm
examples?
already I'm already laughing because like Lauren and Dean and Abe and some of the people that work with us, like they're gonna laugh when they hear this, because they're like, yeah, Mitch can be tough to work with. Like he's like type A and is detailed, and I'll be like,
Yeah,
let's paint it just like this, or let's stack it like that. And so they're just amazing that they just deal with me, right? So like
okay.
that's the best answer, right? And that they're like, they're not doing it because I'm not being that way because the only time I'm like that is because I want the place to look beautiful and to be a
Right.
great guest experience, and they get that. Like,
Yeah.
they get that. They're like, "Okay, if you want the woodshed to look like this, then, like, yeah, we get it." Because I think
So
they're
maybe that's
invested
part of
in.
the answer there. They get that because I do think if they're on board with the vision that we care deeply about guest experience, then you pointing those things out wouldn't feel micromanagey. It would be like feedback of like how we can do this better. So I guess that mindset has to be there to begin with.
But yeah, because I'll be honest, like, not everyone could work with me because I'm sounding crazy as I say this, but, like, I care so much about running the cabin really well that some people would be like, "This guy's crazy. He cares about the details too much." Because I wanna be the opposite of when you check into a guest house and it doesn't have any spatulas, I'm just like,
Right.
"That person doesn't care." And
Right.
I'm probably way on the other end of the spectrum where I'm like, yeah, I'll even send guest messages before they check in. I try to leave them alone after they check in, obviously, but
Yeah.
before they check in, I'll be like, the driest firewood is on the left side of the pile instead of the
Yeah.
right, because I just want them to have a great campfire.
Right.
Yep.
Right. If you're dreaming about a cabin build, or are in the midst of a build, or you just bought a place and are getting ready to host for the very first time, regardless of where you are, sometimes you just need a little help along the way. Shared experiences from someone who's been there, advice from someone who's learned a lot of lessons the hard way. That's me. Or a cheerleader as you finish up. All of these reasons are exactly why I started offering cabin consultations to our Instagram followers and friends who could use some specific one-on-one help. I can't promise to solve all your problems, but I can promise to be transparent about our build costs and process, our organization and project management systems, our favorite and least favorite tools for renting, how we market, and how we found ourselves with almost 80,000 Instagram followers and 100% occupancy in our first year of hosting at Cozy Rock. So if that sounds like it might help you, feel free to visit us at staycozycabin.com or on Instagram at Cozy Rock Cabin and sign up for a time to chat there. I will say I stole this from someone else. This is not mine. I was in a cabin and their guest book had the first page of the guest book. I think it might have introduced themselves first. And then the first page was like, if I were, I don't know if it said this or I added this, but the gist of it is if I were here to show you around, here are 5 things I would make sure to mention. And
Yeah.
now we have that page and I really like it because it's more like, I'm not going to bother you, but if you want like a little additional insight, here's some things that I would be sure to mention. And that I felt like was a huge value add to our guest book when I saw that in someone else's, so that then your messaging can be a little bit simpler and you don't have to like add all these details, but there's still a place where it's like, if I were here walking you around, I would want to tell you where the driest firewood is, you know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I could probably go on for an hour and be like, you might see the moose over here, and if
Yeah.
this is the best way to get the hot tub going here. But of course, part of why people go to a cabin is they want to be doing those things on their own. They want to
Right.
maybe chop their own firewood, or they want to struggle with figuring out the heat a little bit, because that's what a cabin is. And
Right.
yeah, like, you gave me the whole idea for the whole Canva guest guide that they get
Mhm.
before they check in. And so I feel like a majority of guests love reading that. And it's so detailed on all these little extra things, like down to like the thermostat is funky. You might want to, turn this one on and turn that off. And our place is solar, off grid. So that has a whole nother level of like, hey, be
Right.
aware of this and that. And these are all things that you don't need to know checking into a hotel room, right? Like, you're
Right.
not thinking about there's just one thermostat in a hotel room, or
Right.
there's no campfire in the hotel room. And like for our place, it's a wood fired hot tub, so there's work involved in that, and
Right.
people like doing that. I think it's more rewarding than just taking an elevator down to the pool at the hotel, right?
Right.
But the guest guide is so detailed that I think it kind of gets people excited about the quirkiness of the cabin before they arrive. And then
Yep.
that's just, anticipation of like a vacation or a getaway is more than
Yeah.
half of the fun, right? You're
I
looking
agree.
forward, as soon as you book a place, you're looking forward to it. So
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what I found. I mean, some people I'm sure never read the guest book because the day before I'll get a question of like, "Hey, where should we have dinner tonight?" And I don't wanna be snarky and not snarky, but I don't wanna say like, "Well, in the guest book, we have a whole page of these." So instead, I'll just tell them, if it were me arriving tonight, here's what I do. But
Yeah.
it's clear they didn't read it. And then other guests will be like, oh, I've had this on my iPad for the last 3 weeks, like planning our visit. One person was like, I printed it off, and I was like, it is 50 pages long. Like
That's a lot of ink.
that is
Yeah,
not
but
a
that's
small
great.
work.
That's great.
But I mean, I think you're right. I'm an Enneagram 7, so I'm very future oriented. So anticipating is a huge part of travel for me. The actual travel is fun. The reminiscing is really fun, but the anticipation is like a big bulk of it. And so if you can add to that, they're probably not going to pay attention to the thermostat, but even just seeing that that's in the guest book tells them I'm well taken care of. Everything I need will be in there, right? Even if they're not using it yet.
It's funny you bring up the Enneagram. Yeah, I'm a 1, and my wife is not a 1. Like we're different. And then I always have to think about, and I'm sure there's people listening that are like, "What is the Enneagram?" And all I would say is like, go take the test and
I
like
was going to
do
say,
it
go
because
Google it.
it's so cool. And but I have to think about, we have all different personality types as guests. Like some people are so into like building their own fire, and other people don't even want to touch the piece of firewood, and that's fine, like all across the spectrum. But I at least like to provide that info in the guest book and to provide the dry firewood, and then
Yes.
it's their decision what they want to do next.
Right. Oh my God, Mitch, I can't believe I'm super into the Enneagram, and I have never once thought about what different Enneagram types would need from the whole experience, other than sevens, because I'm a 7. But I think this would be a fascinating podcast episode with an Enneagram
Yes.
expert to be like, what things can we do in hospitality for the Enneagram 1, for the Enneagram
Oh, you
5?
could have a different guest book for each personality type, right? Like you
Oh
could
my
be like,
God.
yeah, I
That's
just
like
thought of that.
so much work.
Yeah, yeah, oh yeah. But like it's true. Like I always think about, as soon as I get there, I want to start a campfire, and I think most people do, but other people would rather just turn off the thermostat, and
Right.
that that's fine. It's their stay. But it's good to just think about, to meet people where they're at in terms of, as
Yeah.
guests. So
Yeah, someone asked me on a cabin consultation this week. They're like, the husband had one idea and the wife didn't like it. I love this. And his idea, I thought was really, it had so much heart behind it. And it was, what if we we gave them like a canvas and some art tools and had everybody, when they were there, like paint a small canvas of their experience. And then we start collecting them on the wall. So we have like community art, and that might make them want to come back because they'll see their art. And that, like, an Enneagram 4 would love that, right? It's like a chance to put their unique touch on it and get
yeah,
creative and like express their experience creatively. Or yeah, so this is really fast. Okay, I'm want to now find, if anyone out there is an Enneagram expert and wants to hit me up, it would be super fun to do a whole episode on this. Because it's interesting to think about the different types of people who are coming through your doors and how you tailor your experience for their different needs.
yeah. I'm always cognizant of, like, I don't want to be an overbearing host, like with just too much information or messages. And
Yeah,
then, but I also don't want them to be sitting there like, oh, I wish I knew how to figure out how to do this.
agreed.
Because I would love to. So I've actually, some people don't contact us the whole stay. And I've had other people say, hey, we're having trouble with the hot tub wood stove. And I was like, hey, I'll just be like, hey, do you have FaceTime? I can give you some tips over FaceTime. And so they'll have like the phone on the stove. And I'm like, all right, put this type of kindling in. And then you can tell they're getting one of their first fires going. And then they send a message an hour later. They're like, the fire's going great. And they're all, so it's neat to teach. Like I grew up in Maine just doing all kinds of that
Right.
outdoorsy stuff my whole childhood. But then for people that are coming from the city or that haven't had that experience yet, like I love passing that on, because
Right.
it's a memory they'll always have. Is we went to this cabin in the woods, and we had a campfire, and we
Right.
did s'mores.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's such a different mindset. I don't know if that comes from your Enneagram number or just like who you are as a human, but I think a lot of people, if you're ever in an Airbnb group on Facebook and you see the hosts and what they talk about and some of the things they complain about, it's like, oh, this guest won't stop messaging me. They have all these questions, right? And your response is like, oh, great. I have a chance to like share with you something that I love. let's like, this isn't even just getting it going. This is like, let's have this experience together. Right. And that
Yeah.
is a mindset shift. Cause I think, and there are even moments if I'm having a bad day where if I get a message, I got one at like midnight one time that was like, where's the silverware? And it's like, at first I'm like, oh my God, just open all the drawers. You will surely find it in one of them. But then another part of me is like, I bet they've opened some of the drawers. They're probably feeling frustrated right now. Right. There's like multiple ways that you can think about that. And it all depends on moods. But
Yeah,
I
like,
like
I
that
just
your response is like, let's FaceTime.
yeah, I mean, I was just at a hotel, last week where I couldn't find one of the light switches to turn it off at night, and I was going crazy. I'm like, "I just need darkness to go to sleep," and I'm, like, looking for so anyways, yeah, we've all been there where we're like, "We
Yeah.
can't find this or that," and, again, I think the great thing about Airbnb messaging is that they can, send a message to you or, to our property manager, and we just get right back to them.
Right.
It's almost like we're acting like the front desk in a way
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Well,
cares
and
on a
that's what I
deeper
think
level.
about. That's one of the things from hotels that people don't want to give up. There are things that they want to be different about an Airbnb, but the one thing I've found that most people don't want to give up is that when they're there and they're having a problem, they want you to be able to solve it right away. And I don't blame them because if you can call the front desk and get an answer to where that light switch is, or someone will come up to your room and help you find it, like you do need to solve that problem quickly. And so
Yep.
I'm all for boundaries and I probably need to do a better job with it. But sometimes it's like you just need someone to answer that question for you.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're just like, and I don't know if there's 100 different reasons why I want people to have a good time when staying in our cabin, but one is the reviews, but two is just I want when you spend your hard-earned money on a vacation, you want it to go well. Like you worked hard for that money. So I feel like that's part of why we, care so much as hosts is that we're like we've all been there. We know what it feels like
Right.
to be the guest.
Right.
And it and I've been at like rental houses on the Outer Banks where like there's a problem, the hot tub's not working, and they just like blow you off, and you're like,
Yep.
huh? And it's like you're just as a guest, you're just a number. Whereas here it's like you are the one and only guest, and you're the center of our attention. You know, we'll help you out. So
Yeah. Here's the tricky part is that like not every Airbnb this is like something I think Airbnb as a company is struggling with is like brand consistency because you and I and most people listening to this podcast have fully embraced that mindset. But there's thousands, tens of thousands of hosts worldwide where that is not their approach to it, right? And that's okay. There's different models for different purposes. I get that. But how do you and you mentioned that you were nervous about booking, but then you were pleased that as soon as you opened it up, you started booking. So I guess my question is about marketing and like how do you communicate that to your people that this is a different type of Airbnb? And how have you been able to use that as a selling point of the kind of experience that they're going to expect when they come to your place?
like, well, this actually just clicked for me the other day. Is that so? I ran into another friend that just opened an Airbnb in like uptown Charlotte, like right in the middle, like a few blocks from the football stadium, right? So like
Mhm.
he has the location is like on his side. Like in other words, people
Yeah.
are gonna book it based on location. He also happened to build a beautiful place.
Right.
For us being out in rural Maine, we are we have to differentiate ourselves by one being naturally beautiful, but two like having good ratings and like customer service because
Right.
people aren't coming to us for the location, because they're going to a business conference down the road. They're coming for
Right.
the full experience. And so I feel like that I realize that I'm like, I have to like advertise and market in ways that he doesn't. His
Right.
location does it for him. But then on the other side, we're in the middle of 90 acres and we never have to worry about neighbors and
Right.
noise complaints. Whereas
Right.
his is right next to like two houses where that's the biggest challenge is like being
Yeah.
quiet, getting the
Yeah.
guests to be quiet for the neighbors. So
Yeah, there's different challenges everywhere. I think you have such a niche offering in terms of like the ability to fly directly there. And I feel like this it's interesting, right? Because it feels like, oh, your target population is like small because it's niche, but that also means that you are one of only in that population doing this kind of thing. So that is the challenge of like, you need to find those people and there's just less of them, but you're also in that community. So I'm curious, when you were building, how were you thinking about how you would market it? And was it mostly word of mouth in the pilots community, or how have you found those people who can really take advantage of everything you've created?
So there's a ton of Facebook groups for pilots. Like there's almost one in every state, like, pilots of Virginia, pilots of Pennsylvania. And so I just started spreading the word there, and it spread like wildfire because, like, pilots, if you own a small airplane, you want nothing more than to bring it to a unique place, right?
Yeah,
And the idea of parking it right next to this cabin instead of, getting an Uber and then hauling your bags and all those
right.
things. So that's been awesome. But so as soon as a pilot finds out about this place, a lot of times they just book it. So like
Yeah.
I tend to focus more on, let's make sure we're doing a great job for just drive in customers.
Oh,
And
that's so interesting.
the
Because the
way that
pilots
we
are just all like immediately pumped about it.
yeah. Yeah, and we shut the runway down in the winter, so it's like everyone in the late fall,
Oh,
winter, early spring is all just driving in, and so again, that's part of. I hope we did this right, in that we tried to make the place aesthetically beautiful, like Cozy Rock, and that
yeah.
people come because it's a beautiful cabin. If it wasn't beautiful, they keep scrolling, right? So they
Right.
keep scrolling till they
Right.
find the one that looks awesome.
Right.
So I'm so glad that we spent the extra time and effort making, like the cedar ceiling,
Yeah.
like just stuff like that. Like that
Yes.
um, makes the place stand out, I think. And that would be my advice to anyone else, is like, if you're thinking about, taking the cheaper route versus, the more expensive route, I think the more expensive route pays off investment wise, because
Yeah.
you get more bookings, right? You just
Yeah.
get more, because anyone can build a basic regular looking cabin.
Yep.
So
And it's so much, I mean, speaking from someone who has hosted at 2 houses that were pre-built, and I've worked really hard to make them as nice as we can, and then one that I was able to design from the ground up, and doing cabin consultations with a bunch of folks who buy a turnkey rental and then are asking, okay, how do we market this? How do we get attention? How do we increase our bookings? And part of it, there's tons of things you can do. It's not helpless, but I am currently managing multiple rentals in those two buckets. And it is way harder when you don't have the bones, whether it's the actual structural bones or the design bones, to redo everything is very expensive and very hard to do it as well. So doing it, if you have the luxury of a build or even like a reno, really investing in doing that well, I think is the
yeah,
biggest value add for marketing down the road.
yeah. And so we were able to do that with our community bank gave us a good construction loan, and
Yeah.
we wouldn't have been able to, do it without them. And and I'm glad we spent the money, because we didn't want to be just a one-star hotel. We wanted to be like the five-star experience.
Yeah.
So, but those are tough decisions when you're like first
I
looking at
know.
the build. So
I know. Are there any decisions that you would have done differently if you were to do it over again?
I would have done two bathrooms because we only have one,
Um,
and we and again, like, because it was an A-frame, we didn't quite have room to jam one into the second floor. Yeah, that would have been,
'Cause you
um
can sleep, your listing says 10 guests.
because we built this separate, so the main cabin sleeps, six-ish, and then we built this separate little bunk cabin with four more bunks, and that's like actually like my favorite. Like, my kids love it. It's like a
Yeah,
really neat little rustic bunk cabin. Smells like cedar inside. But
I
now all
love
of a sudden
that.
we got 10 people with one bathroom. So yeah. Yep. I didn't think about that. I didn't know about it. I didn't.
Okay, but here's the spin on that though. Like I grew up going to a family camp where we had a bunkhouse and there were like, 8 to 10 of us and we all had to wait in line at night,
Yeah.
and it's like, as you could tell, the movie was like winding down. Someone would like speed off to get to the bathroom first. And in the moment, it might be annoying, but those create memories. And to
Yeah.
me, there is this tension between the cabin experience, the way that I fell in love with it as a kid, and the cabin experiences we're creating now,
Yeah.
where it's like heated bathroom floors and leave nothing to the imagination. You have everything at your fingertips. And so I do think to have some elements where you're like, this is a cabin, share a bathroom.
I know. Yeah. Like on your other podcast, we talked about this. Like, the fine line between too fancy versus not rustic enough. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think I agree with the bathroom thing. And that was my line of thinking, like, yeah, what if you have to wait in line for a minute for the bathroom? The only part where it's been a little funny is we've had some groups of like outings of like a group of not strangers, but it's like a group. It's not a family. It's like we had a
Yeah.
group of like a men's group came for a weekend retreat, and I'm picturing them like maybe sharing a bed or like 10 guys waiting for the bathroom, and like, but they made it work. They had a
That's
great
right.
time, but
And it's not like they didn't know going in. They saw the
right,
listing and they made the choice of like, we're okay with this and it's worth it for all the other things.
yeah,
Or
yeah.
maybe
So
they were like, that's the experience we want.
yeah, so that would that's one regret. The other regret, well, yeah, no, it's not really a regret. I don't have a ton of regrets. I mean,
Yeah.
it's but I am constantly trying to figure out how to reinvest our earnings back into making it better and making it better, like
Yeah.
doing things that I weren't originally in the plan, like adding a hot tub or a woodshed or improving the driveway or
Yeah.
adding two more kayaks. So now we have four, stuff like that. So we've kind of been able to like improve things based on the guest need. Like we've
Yeah.
had a few people, we've had families of four that kind of hinted like, oh, I wish you had more than two kayaks. So I'm thinking like, how incredible would it be for a family coming this summer to have four kayaks for four people?
Right.
And so yeah, it's fun to think about how can I make it better. Um,
Yeah. That there is a trickiness there too, I think, because Sean is always coming up with ideas of things we should do. And I'm not inherently opposed to any of them, but I'm always like, we've been doing this 4 years and nobody has asked for that. So I hear, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong, to be clear. That doesn't mean it's wrong. But there is this balance between like figuring out how do I continue to improve it and make it better? And like, when is it actually good? And my brain just needs to stop thinking that like,
yeah,
yeah, stop striving for that perfection. But I feel like in the first year or 2, it felt different for me. The first year or 2, it was like constant improvements, but then it got to a point where it's like, okay, no one has complained about not complained, but like no one has mentioned that that's
yeah.
missing.
And
I debate this with the
I
sauna.
really try to pull feedback out of guests when they check out. Tell us what we could do to make it better in the future. And most people don't say anything, but if they say
Yeah.
something small like, actually, we ran out of batteries and the flashlights, I'm like, all right, done. Like, all right,
Yeah,
we're gonna get new batteries
that's
because
right.
yeah,
Because
it's
it is hard to get critical feedback out of folks. So when you get it, I do think it's important to take it seriously because
yeah,
I think most people's instinct, especially if they had a great time, it's like, I don't want you to think I didn't enjoy it, but here's a small
right,
thing that can make it better.
right,
Mitch, this was great. It's so fun to watch from a distance and see how well you all are doing. Having talked to you 2 years ago when you were at the very beginning and just
yeah,
seeing like what a destination you've become in Maine with such a cool offering that no one else has done yet.
yeah. Thank you. Yeah, and thank you to you. Like, what you've done in this community is pretty awesome, and that you're so sharing and giving, and like you don't view other cabins as competition, you view them as like friends. And I think that
Yeah.
that's kind of what this is all about, right? We're not like
Yeah.
a cutthroat hotel industry where we're trying to like we're
Right.
all just like we're all doing the same thing, we're all friends, like there's enough space and people and cabins to go around.
Right.
So yeah, I
Especially Maine. It's the way life should be. Not enough people know about it. And
yep,
so the more people creating destinations like what you're doing, I think the more people discover their love for Maine. And that love is going to be spread around to everyone who's creating cool places in the state. I think. I think they'll come, maybe they come to Cozy Rock and then find out about you via the podcast. And then next time they go visit you. And then next time they go to the Hideaway Inn, right? Like, and there's just,
yeah,
they have a whole list of places that keep bringing them back to Maine over and over again. And then they become the people who are like, Maine has a special place in my life. And it all started when Mitch introduced me to it or whatever, right? Like, I don't know. There's something beautiful there.
yeah, and it's just fun to watch. Yeah, to watch other people do kind of what we've done. Like my friend Ben is about to open up, it's called Alder Cove, but it's a brand new cabin on a lake on an island in Puget Sound. So it's a lake on an island on the ocean. It's going to be so cool. And he's like just launching it. And so I've been coaching him along the way. And so it's fun. It's fun.
Yeah.
So I hope that people on the West Coast check him out, because I know all the blood, sweat, and tears that he's put into it, just like we all have. So
Yep. Thank you so much for doing this.
yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us, and if you liked what you heard, feel free to leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify or share some of your favorite parts over on Apple Podcast. If you have feedback or suggestions for the future, you can also find me on Instagram at Cozy Rock Cabin. Looking forward to next week.